Good day, everyone. Today, we are going to discuss one of the most fascinating topics in business forecasting, judgmental forecasting. Now, when students hear the word forecasting, they often think about statistics, spreadsheets, regression analysis, moving averages, artificial intelligence, and complicated mathematical models. But let me ask you a simple question. What happens when there is no data? What happens when a company is launching a product that has never existed before? What happens when a government faces a crisis that has never happened in history? What happens when an organization enters a completely new market? In situations like these, all the statistical models in the world may not help very much because there is no historical data to analyze. That is where judgmental forecasting becomes important. Today's discussion is about understanding when human judgment becomes necessary, how it can help us make decisions, and most importantly, how to prevent human judgment from becoming a source of error. By the end of this lecture, you will understand why judgment is both one of the most valuable and one of the most dangerous forecasting tools available to managers. Imagine that it is the year 2007. No one has ever seen an iPhone before. Steve Jobs walks on stage and introduces a device that combines a phone, a music player, and an internet communicator. Now think about this. If Apple wanted to forecast how many iPhones would sell during the first year, what historical sales data could they use? There was none. The product had never existed. No moving average, no time series data, no seasonal pattern, nothing. The only thing available was human judgment. Executives, engineers, marketers, retailers, and experts had to estimate future demand using their experience and intuition. That is judgmental forecasting. Let us begin by discussing when judgmental forecasting is used. The first situation is when no data exists. This is the most obvious case. Imagine Tesla announcing a flying car. Nobody has ever bought a Tesla flying car because it does not exist yet. Since there are no past sales records, Tesla would have to rely on expert opinions, customer surveys, market studies, and executive judgment. Another example occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic. Businesses, governments, and hospitals faced circumstances never seen before. Forecasting models based on previous years became less reliable because the world suddenly changed. Decision makers often had to rely heavily on expert judgment. This demonstrates an important principle. Judgment is not a substitute for data. Judgment becomes necessary when data is unavailable. The second situation occurs when statistical forecasts already exist, but require adjustment. Imagine a grocery store forecasting sales of bottled water. The statistical model predicts sales based on historical trends. However, management learns that a major hurricane is expected next week. The statistical model does not yet know this information. Customers may rush to stores and buy enormous quantities of bottled water. In this case, managers adjust the statistical forecast using judgment. Notice something important. The forecast began with data. Judgment was only used to incorporate new information. This is usually a better approach. The third situation is combining statistical and judgmental forecasts. Suppose Netflix forecasts subscriber growth using data analytics. At the same time, industry experts provide their own forecasts based on market trends and consumer behavior. Netflix may combine both forecasts to create a final estimate. This approach often balances the strengths of machines and humans. The machine provides objectivity, humans provide context. Together, they may produce better results than either method alone. Now let us discuss something extremely important. Human judgment is powerful, but human judgment is flawed. Every person in this classroom has biases. I have biases. You have biases. Business executives have biases. Government leaders have biases. Investors have biases. Understanding these limitations is critical. The first limitation is inconsistency. Imagine asking a student how many hours they studied for an exam. You ask them today, they say 10 hours. You ask them again next week. Now they say 12 hours. You ask them a month later. Now they say 8 hours. Human memory is imperfect. Human attention changes. Human moods fluctuate. The same person may provide different forecasts depending on stress levels, emotions, fatigue, or confidence. That inconsistency creates forecasting errors. The second limitation involves political agendas. This happens more often than people realize. Suppose a sales manager forecasts that her team will sell $1 million worth of products. Now, suppose she secretly believes the team can actually sell $2 million. Why might she forecast only 1 million? Because if the team sells 2 million, she appears to be a hero. She exceeded expectations. This is called sandbagging. The forecast becomes a political tool rather than an honest prediction. Similarly, politicians sometimes provide overly optimistic economic forecasts because positive forecasts make policies appear successful. Forecasts can become instruments of persuasion rather than objective estimates. The third limitation is anchoring. Anchoring is one of the most powerful psychological biases. Imagine you are shopping for a used car. The seller says the price is $20,000. Even if you know nothing about cars, your mind automatically uses $20,000 as a reference point. Your negotiations begin around that number. The same thing happens in forecasting. Suppose last month's sales were 1,000 units. A manager may automatically forecast 1,050 units next month. The previous value becomes an anchor. Unfortunately, important new information may be ignored. Anchoring often causes forecasters to underestimate major changes. So how do we improve judgmental forecasts? The chapter provides several principles. The first principle is to clearly define the forecasting task. This sounds simple, but it is incredibly important. Consider this question. Will our company perform well next year? What does perform well mean? Revenue, profit, customer satisfaction, market share, employee retention? The question is too vague. A better question would be, what will our quarterly revenue be during the next fiscal year? Specific questions produce better forecasts. The second principle is using a systematic approach. Think about airline pilots. Before takeoff, pilots use checklists. Even experienced pilots follow the checklist. Why? Because human memory is unreliable. The same idea applies to forecasting. A forecaster should have a checklist of relevant factors: economic conditions, competitor actions, consumer behavior, government regulations, technological changes. The checklist ensures important factors are not forgotten. The third principle is documentation. If someone adjusts a forecast, they should explain why. What information justified the adjustment? What assumptions were made? What evidence supports the decision? Documentation creates accountability. Without documentation, forecasting becomes guesswork. The fourth principle is evaluation. Organizations should compare forecasts with actual outcomes. Imagine playing basketball without ever looking at the scoreboard. You would never know whether you were improving. The same applies to forecasting. Without evaluation, organizations cannot learn from mistakes. The fifth principle is segregation. Forecasters should be separated from forecast users whenever possible. Why? Because users often have incentives. Sales managers want achievable targets. Executives want positive numbers. Investors want good news. Separating forecasting from decision-making reduces conflicts of interest. Let's look at a real-world example. Australia's pharmaceutical benefits scheme manages billions of dollars in medicine subsidies. Forecasting medicine demand is extremely important because mistakes can cost taxpayers millions of dollars. Researchers found that new medicine forecasts performed well because they followed structured procedures. Assumptions were documented, processes were formalized, multiple experts participated. However, policy-related forecasts were weaker because they relied heavily on one person and lacked systematic review. The lesson is simple. Good forecasting requires systems, not heroes. Organizations should not depend on a single genius. They should depend on a reliable process. Now let us discuss one of the most famous judgmental forecasting methods ever developed, The Delphi method. The Delphi method was created by the Rand Corporation during the 1950s. Its purpose was to obtain reliable forecasts from experts. Imagine that you want to forecast the future of artificial intelligence. You gather 10 experts. Now here is the problem. If you place all 10 experts in one room, the most famous expert may dominate the discussion. Junior experts may remain silent. Strong personalities may overpower better ideas. The Delphi method solves this problem. Experts never meet face to face. Instead, they submit forecasts anonymously. A facilitator collects the forecasts. The facilitator summarizes results. Experts review the summary and revise their forecasts. This process repeats several times. Eventually, consensus emerges. Why does this work? Because anonymity removes social pressure. People can disagree without fear. Ideas compete on merit rather than status. A young expert has the same voice as a senior executive. This often improves forecast quality. However, Delphi is not perfect. It takes time. Experts may lose interest. Participants may drop out. Organizations sometimes use a variation called estimate talk estimate. Experts first provide estimates individually, then they discuss, then they revise estimates. This approach is faster, but reintroduces social influence. The loudest voice can dominate. Next, let us examine forecasting by analogy. Think about how real estate appraisers work. Suppose someone wants to know the value of a house. The house has never been sold before. What does the appraiser do? They compare it with similar houses. Those similar houses are analogies. The same principle applies in forecasting. Suppose a university plans to create a new online doctoral program. Administrators may look at similar programs launched by other universities. How long did development take? How many students enrolled? How much revenue was generated? These analogies provide valuable insights. A famous example involved a curriculum project estimated to require 18 to 30 months. An expert examined similar projects and discovered that many took 7 to 10 years. The actual project took 8 years. The analogy forecast was far more accurate. The lesson is powerful. People often underestimate complexity. Analogies reveal reality. Now let us discuss scenario forecasting. Scenario forecasting is particularly useful in uncertain environments. Instead of predicting one future, we imagine multiple futures. Consider the future of electric vehicles. Nobody knows exactly what will happen. So companies develop scenarios. Scenario 1, rapid adoption. Scenario 2, moderate growth. Scenario 3, technological setbacks. Each scenario explores different possibilities. Organizations then prepare plans for each future. Think of scenario forecasting like preparing for weather. If there is a 20% chance of rain, you may still bring an umbrella. You are preparing for multiple possibilities. Businesses do the same thing. Scenario planning helps organizations avoid being surprised. Now let us discuss new product forecasting. This is one of the most challenging forecasting tasks because there is no historical data. 3 common methods are used. The first is the Salesforce composite. Salespeople estimate demand within their territories. This method captures valuable local knowledge. Salespeople often know customers better than executives. However, salespeople may intentionally underestimate demand to make targets easier. Bias becomes a problem. The second method is executive opinion. Senior managers provide forecasts. The advantage is broad experience. The disadvantage is overconfidence. Executives sometimes become overly optimistic about products they helped create. The third method is customer intentions. Organizations ask potential customers whether they intend to buy. For example, before introducing a new smartphone, a company may survey consumers. Would you purchase this product? The challenge is that intentions do not always translate into actions. Many people say they will buy something but never do. This is why customer intention surveys should be interpreted carefully. Finally, let us discuss judgmental adjustments to statistical forecasts. This is extremely common in practice. Most organizations use statistical forecasts. Then humans modify them. The question is, when should adjustments occur? The answer is surprisingly simple. Adjust forecasts only when you possess important new information. Imagine a retailer forecasting toy sales. The statistical model predicts 10,000 units. Management learns that a celebrity influencer with 20 million followers will promote the toy next week. That information is not yet reflected in historical data. An adjustment may be justified. However, managers often make adjustments for the wrong reasons. They see random fluctuations and assume patterns exist. They become overly optimistic. They make small changes that actually reduce accuracy. Research consistently shows that excessive adjustments often make forecasts worse. The best adjustments tend to be large, well-supported, and based on genuinely new information. A fascinating example comes from Australia's Tourism Forecasting Committee. Experts reviewed statistical forecasts and adjusted them. However, studies found the resulting forecasts were consistently optimistic. Actual tourism growth was lower than expected. Why? Perhaps experts wanted positive outcomes. Perhaps group discussions reinforced optimism. Whatever the reason, the case reminds us that expertise alone does not eliminate bias. Even highly qualified experts can make systematic errors. As we conclude today's lecture, I want you to remember 4 major lessons. First, judgmental forecasting is essential when data is absent, incomplete, or when new information exists that statistical models cannot capture. Second, human judgment is vulnerable to biases such as inconsistency, political agendas, and anchoring. Third, structure improves forecasting quality. Clear objectives, documentation, checklists, evaluation, and segregation reduce errors. Fourth, methods such as Delphi, forecasting by analogy, scenario forecasting, and new product forecasting provide practical tools for dealing with uncertainty. Most importantly, remember this. The goal of forecasting is not to predict the future perfectly. Nobody can do that. The goal is to reduce uncertainty enough to make better decisions. Forecasting is not about being right all the time. It is about being less wrong than you would have been without a forecast. And in business, being less wrong can be worth millions of dollars. Thank you, everyone. In our next session, we will continue exploring how organizations combine quantitative methods and managerial judgment to make better forecasting decisions in an increasingly uncertain world.